Please can I welcome you, everyone, to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee taking place from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Margot Power, Chairperson of the committee. May I advise that the meeting is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. The open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded, though we've had that once already. We have a mix of in-person and online participation today. For those in the room, please may I ask that you speak clearly and remember to use your microphone. For those online, may I ask that you mute your microphone until you need to speak. Thank you. Could we ensure that mobile devices and other electronic devices are all turned off or on silent? For those of us in the room, in the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow any instructions given to you by staff or fire marshals. All fire exits are marked by green exit signs above Councillor Godfrey. Please proceed quickly and calmly to the assembly point, which is in Abbey Gardens, and do not use the lift. Yeah. Use the list, always best. Thank you. Let's go to the agenda. Mrs. Graham, do we have any apologies?
Yes, apologies received from Councillor Miller, Chair.
Thank you very much. And do we have any closures of interest? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. The first of the non-prejudicial interest as an employee of KPMG who provide audit services to the Council.
Thank you.
Furthermore, as item 10 considers or could consider the possibility of extending those services, I'd be happy to leave the meeting at that point.
Would you advise, Mrs.
Yeah, Councillor Press, we did have a quick conversation about your employment prior to the start of the meeting. The decision about who to appoint from a long list of several options is not a decision that this council makes. It's a decision that is outside of our hands. So because we can't be part of that decision-making process, you can stay in the room.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Chairperson's announcements, item 3. I only have one announcement. The Workforce Matters Working Party has no representatives from the Conservative side. I'm sure Councillor Gebel will address that. Thank you. If you could put those through to Mr. O'Reilly. Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, the minutes of the previous meeting on pages 5 to 8. May I take those as agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. We have no public participation, so we turn to agenda item 6, Treasury Management. Mrs. Farley, I think you will be introducing this paper.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay?
Beautifully, thank you.
Brilliant. Good evening. So the SIP for Code requires the Council to approve a mid-year Treasury Management report each year. This report sets out the performance of the Treasury Management function from the beginning of April to the end of September 2021. All Treasury activity has complied with the Council's Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22 and all relevant statute, guidance and accounting standards. If you turn to Table 2 on page 14 of your pack, you'll see that there's been no change in borrowing between the end of March and the end of September. And this represents the fact that there's been no new borrowing taken out, and no borrowing has been repaid. Total investments have increased by £17.4 million. And this reflects the fact that 31st of March generally shows the lowest cash balances over the financial year each year. Table 4 on page 17 of your pack shows the investments portfolio as at the 30th of September. You'll see there was quite a high proportion of Winchester's cash balances in short term and liquid investments. This is to enable the funding of the capital programme as well as to meet the Council's business as usual working capital requirements. As an aside, many of you will have heard today that the Monetary Policy Committee increase the base rate from 0.1% to 0.25%. So hopefully in the coming reports, we'll start to see some higher income returns coming through. I think the only other thing I was going to give you an update on was that we're expecting CIPFA to release the newest versions of the Prudential Code and the Treasury Management Code later this month. We haven't seen them yet, but it will probably be Christmas week. CIPFA has announced a soft launch for 22-23, which means that authorities are required to report their liability benchmark, which Winchester already does in its Treasury Management strategy. Full compliance with the new codes is expected for the following year, 23-24. That was all I was planning to say for the moment, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Farley. Do we have any questions, members? Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Table 4 notes the majority of the vast majority of our investment income comes from pooled property fund. Any increase in the bank base rate, how might that be expected to affect that property fund?
So I'm not sure there would be too much change in the return from the pooled property fund, but that's something I can look into and come back to you and confirm.
Thank you, Mrs. Farley. If you would, that would be kind. Any more questions? Councillor Crask.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, if I may.
Would you like to remove your mask? Do you feel comfortable doing so?
If you cannot hear me, then
I am struggling a bit.
You are struggling a bit. Well, I don't want you to struggle, Chair, so let me remove the mask. So a couple of questions. First one on page 13, 14.9. On the 24th September, Arlington Close published its review of credit advice, referring to the risks around the continuing pandemic and a period of economic adjustment post-government support remaining, and the likelihood of further economic fallout. Are Arlington Close doing a review given the current situation?
Yes, so they are constantly reviewing the situation, and they'll be providing more advice as they see fit. In terms of the base rate, whether the impact on the base rate, they've not come out with anything yet. Yeah, I can't speak for Arlington Close, but they do review all the time and they do send out their advice. Is there anything further that you wanted on that?
Thanks. That was just reference to all the thought around the inflation rate. Currently, I think it's peaked at over 5%. The interest rate's just gone up. We've got the impact of the latest variant. And just look at some guidance, particularly around what the council has factored into its inflation rate for services next year. So interested in what Arlington Close might come up with in terms of a review and when that might be available, particularly in light of the budget coming in early next year. Thank you.
So the review that they did was in relation to how it sets its credit advice. So they take into account the current economic situation and where they see things going, and from that they then set their credit advice. So where they advise Winchester to invest its money, and for how long, rather than in terms of setting its impact on the rates. Sorry, I can't.
Let me attempt to clarify. I think, Councillor Crask, you were asking about the effect of inflation regarding our budget setting for next year.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking to see if Arlene Close would be publishing a review so we could consider that. I appreciate it's nothing to do with the paper in front of us, but I just wanted to let you know why I was asking the question.
Councillor Cutler, would you like to discuss? No.
Councillor Cutler, I'm afraid you have to use one of one of the mics from over there.
I think it's outside the scope of the Treasury Management paper, Mrs. Farley, that's why. But I think Councillor Cutler may be able to discuss how we factored inflation into our budget considerations for the coming year. Would that be fair?
Thank you, Chair.
I'm not entirely sure it is fair, but I think if I recall, we've factored in a lower rate than we appear to be seeing now, but we haven't reached the point of confirming the budget yet. So I think in January after Christmas, when we've got a better understanding and probably hear from Arlene Close, who have generally been pretty good, but in this particular case, I think we've taken unawares because they definitely didn't predict an interest rate rise, and they didn't feel that inflation would go above 5, I don't think, whereas we're now talking about sort of 6%, possibly in the next month or so. So, of course, we will reassess our budgetary position based on that and based on I think we based it on 4% before, and also, of course, based on the spending. You know, we have to review because we've had the spending review announcement today as well, which unfortunately is once again a 1-year settlement. But that's another story. We won't get into that today.
No, but we won't get into that now. Is that all right, Councillor Close? Does that cover where we are?
It is, thank you, Jen. I apologise. I didn't mean to extend the subject outside of the scope of today's meeting. I was just letting you know why I was asking the question.
Do you have any further questions?
I do have another one, and I apologise for being awkward. I really don't intend to be. So 15.1, and this is page 14, table 1. It's purely for my own education, so I apologise. So we borrow 166 from the PCOB to cover the housing revenue account, effectively. And then we have some 80 million from internal borrowing, effectively to cover the general fund. I know where some of that borrowing is spent, land purchase, for example, but I can't figure out from the accounts where the rest of the borrowing goes. So where is anybody able to tell me where the borrowing has gone? Where we borrowed, spent 80 million that we've used internal borrowing for?
A variety of purposes. Mrs. Keys?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the internal borrowing is being used to finance our capital programme. So we've used internal borrowing, so using our reserves rather than going externally to borrow for the general fund capital programme. So we finance things like the building of the leisure centre.
Is there anywhere where that might be available in terms of where that money is spent? I apologise, I tried to find it.
Yeah, so the papers for that are the capital strategy that sets out the capital programme, and it also shows where all the financing comes from for those assets. So it will show you the financing of the programme going into the future.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys.
Thank you.
Any more questions, please, councillors? Thank you. Any debate? We are asked to note this paper. Are we happy to note this paper? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Farley. Moving on to the next agenda item, the government's quarterly update. This is quite a long paper. I suggest we break down our questions initially into pages 28 to 31, which is the paper introducing. Do we have any questions on that? Councillor Godfrey.
It's not what is there, but what is not there. This is the quarterly report update on governance. I'd be interested to know why we normally get some information about a highlight of personnel issues and what's been going on in the council. There's nothing no mention of that. And I understand that sickness levels have shot up during the last few weeks, and what the impact of that might be would be of interest of the committee. And the second is that we're now well over a year since we were due to have a constitution review consideration, and the constitution does not receive a mention at all, except as a heading in this paper. I wonder why not.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Mrs. Kirk.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Godfrey, I will ask Mr. Howson also, but the issues around sickness has never been reported in these quarterly reports. So at the last Audit and Governance meeting, we brought our first personnel-related report to this committee, but there's not been staff sickness-related information in this report. I think at any stage that it's had my name on it, so I'm not sure about that one. Yeah, in terms of the constitutional review, so you know that the main review was undertaken and took, I think, over 2.5 years, and we adopted that new constitution and said 6 months after that we do a light touch review just to check that it's working. So I just want to be clear, this isn't a fundamental review of the constitution. It was a touch base to see if that's working. So that 6 month hit Councillor Godfrey well within the pandemic period, and we have prioritised monitoring officer caseload, these sorts of reports and pandemic related work over that constitutional review. We appreciate it has been longer than necessary, so Catherine and I, purely based on workloads, have sought some external help for that. If I give an example, Councillor Godfrey, it took me 2 days to review the articles of the Constitution. That's the simplest bit at all, and that was 2 solid days' work. So it's quite labour intensive, and we have sought some help. So I will be looking to progress that imminently, but it will go to the Constitutional Working Party first before working its way through this committee and full council. I'm
grateful, Madam Chairman, for that update. I fully accept we don't want this update to be full of unnecessary information, but I can only assume, and like that confirmed, that there are no significant issues relating to staff sickness which would normally come to this committee for reporting. Just to put my mind at rest.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. So we're planning on bringing reports to this committee that will have the sickness record, so you will get those updated. I do know, because we've been tracking it, November was our highest level of COVID-related sickness since the start of the pandemic. We are continuing to monitor that. We have had no outbreaks within the offices that we are managing. From my own personal experience, Councillor Godfrey, it appears to be the primary schools that are the issue with our staff-related sickness currently. But clearly, this is something we are monitoring closely since the Prime Minister's announcements last week in response to the new variant. We are attending many calls with the Director of Public Health, and we have checked in with our business continuity plans. It feels a bit like Groundhog Day because we've done this before, but we are absolutely making sure that we are ready to make necessary moves depending on what happens over the Christmas period.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Thank you, Mrs. Kirkman. Any more questions, please, on pages up to 33? 31. None, thank you. Moving on to pages 32 to 43. Please do.
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence there. Councillors, I do just have an update for you in respect on page 34, which is our longest outstanding audit item in respect of the Hampshire Cultural Trust. You'll be aware this has been an action that's been outstanding since 2016. Since I've been a director in 2019, I have been very much actively pursuing this one. And after the papers were dispatched, but before this meeting, I can confirm this audit action is now completed. So I hope that's good news for the committee, but that is finally of the over 2 years action outstanding. So it's really good news.
I think we'd like to congratulate you on getting there.
The legal team, Margot, I can't take personal responsibility for that, but thank you. I will absolutely.
Congratulations to all concerned. I think we're very glad to see that.
Oh, yes.
Any questions, please, on pages 32 to 43? Councillor Cross, thank you.
Thanks, Jake. It's been awkward again, I'm afraid. Given what we just heard about staff absences, I'm reading page 38, which speaks to 12.25, that owing to the ongoing pressures presented by the COVID pandemic, to continue to prioritise resources with the pressures on teams, there's not sufficient officer capacity to facilitate the conclusion of the originally agreed audit plan. So we're saying that we don't have enough officers to get the audit plan done, and we're going to be reassessing the plan.
What page is that on, Councillor
Have I got
Cross?
the right page 38? Have I got the right?
Thank you. I was going to ask a question about that. How are we planning that prioritisation? How are we mitigating the risk?
Yeah, I'm happy to help with that, Chair. It's more about the officers who are necessary to take in the audit. We would prefer to focus on their frontline efforts in respect of the pandemic or their day-to-day work. So if I can give an example, Councillor Krask, in one of the audits, which was particularly challenging, I think it was on project management, we allow our auditors to pick their sample, and they picked Central Winchester Regeneration, which in this next quarter would be impossible for the team to engage in. So in that instance, they've selected other samples and have not included that one, because we said if you want that one, it would just need to be delayed. So it was Mr. Botham and I sat down with SIAP and looked at the work that was remaining on the audit and just said, could we shift some of that timing around in terms of officer capacity? There was one on here, the two IT ones that we were looking at reviewing. That's later on in Anthony's paper, Councillor Press, so we can come back to it then. The specific tweaks that were made, you can see that. I can't give you the page number off of my head. Here we go, on page 54. So, for example, working in partnership was postpone the audit until all management actions identified on the previous review are undertaken, because we would be starting a review when we hadn't finished the previous one. We haven't finished the previous one because that is our economic team who have been dealing with high street and business related COVID matters. So that's another live example there. The user lifecycle and access management or asset management IT ones, I was taking those away and was going to report back to Anthony. Those two can go ahead as planned. I know in open spaces there's a key officer sickness at the moment, which means that we can't undertake that one. So it's these sorts of things. So it's just that simply we don't have the right officer available at the right time. So we're looking at how we can shift some of those. Our absolute priority is to make sure that, and this is sorry Anthony, I'm stealing your thunder later, but that they can give their reassurance and their control assessment to this committee, and they are happy that they can do that even with these in place. What they've said is they can't have further impact, and Mr. Botham and I understand that. Does that help, Chair?
Very much so, thank you. Are you happy, Councillor Cross? I think we may come back to that later on in the papers. I have a question on page 35 regarding the two outstanding items on the health and safety work, and note that we expect them to be cleared in January. Our next meeting is not in, no, No, you expect them to be cleared by March. Our next meeting is not until. Sorry, you expect them to be cleared by our next meeting, which is not until March. As they are high priority, do you think there's a chance we might get them dealt with earlier? Mr. Botham, are you with us?
Hello, Chair. Yeah, on that issue, whilst I can't off the top of my head give a date of when they'll be completed, they will be completed well ahead of the next meeting. We now have the Health and Safety Officer in place. We've had the first meeting of the Health and Safety Group. Work on reviewing all of the risk assessments and the policy is well underway now, and will be completed very early in the new year. I will check with Mr. Ingram and as to a specific date, and I can let members. I can confirm that to members as soon as we can clarify that.
Thank you. We would be grateful. Any more questions, members? Moving. Sorry. Up to page 43. Could we move on then to the progress report, pages 44 to 45? Which is the internal audit progress report. Do we have any questions on that? Thank you. Then on to the Code of Conduct report on 56 to 57. Councillor Godfrey.
Knowing how much work goes into investigating these complaints, say we have enough resources. Is there any alternative to the glacial progress on these? I know there's enormous amount that goes in, but to wait 18 months for a decision is a decision delay and all that.
This is good. Yeah, happy to help, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. In terms of, I mean, I'm sure you're talking about the item that's the highest outstanding on there. I won't go into any detail, but this is an internal matter. It's a police matter, and therefore we're in the hands of the police in terms of the closure of this one, Councillor Godfrey. I do anticipate being able to close that, so that's not technically a city council matter, but it's one that came in as such. So just to explain that one, so that one is out of our hands. That one it isn't open as long as that one has been. Certainly the next two in terms of latterly in 2020, one of those we've been looking to get to a standard subcommittee. We have been trying to do that for several months, but the engagement with the complainants and witness of the subcommittee has been difficult. So we are continuing to pursue that one. And in respect of the 5th of October, Councillor Godfrey, that is 12 complaints in relation to the same parish council. Is incredibly complex. We reviewed several complaints after receiving those initial 12 because they continued to come in, and that one did go to an external investigator. So I appreciate what you're saying about resources, Councillor Godfrey, but certainly I think long gone is the days where monitoring officers used to do investigations for other monitoring officers and other councils, and there's simply not the capacity. So there, we have an external investigator who has done that work for us, and that report is near final draft.
And we have no capacity to turn away this unwelcome business.
Councillor Godfrey, I don't think it's possible for the monitoring officers to simply turn away business. If I can point to a couple of the items here, so I know the 8th of November complaint and the 26th of November complaint. If you see they're under assessment by the independent person, and that's happened quite quickly, that's because the assessment of the office of the monitoring officer, it's not just me, it's my deputy monitoring officer colleagues. The conclusion of those is that there's no case to answer, or it's not a matter for the monitoring officer. We have to check that with the independent person. So those ones do get shut down quite quickly. I think the ones in the middle is where there's some informal resolution and there's so many toing and froing conversations, and they're the ones that that take the time and effort, but you usually get the right outcome when you do those well. She says.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Coburn. Any further questions on the Standards report? In which case we move on to the Corporate Risk Register on page 50. Do we have any questions? In which case,
I wonder if my understanding could be reset. If we take the council's highest priority of climate change, which is met by CRO 10, this seems to have an indication of quite a serious impact and likelihood, and our action plan may well lead to some benefit. But comparing that with many of the other risks, such as CRO1 or the CRO7, which don't have the same likelihood and don't seem to make any progress, both of which will directly impact on the risk about climate change. I wonder if it's possible to explain why the lack of funding is not seen as either likely or having the same level of impact as the climate change, which would both those two risks support. Just trying to understand the relationship between the two.
well, I think we can see that CRO1 would result in an immediate loss of service, which is something never to be desired. Councillor Cutler, I'm not sure if you can enlighten us on this one.
I mean, again, I'm not sure I can enlighten Councillor Godfrey because he's as much an expert on risk as I am. But I think you've already made the point, Chair, that is unfortunately taken in isolation, and it's actually quite difficult to merge them entirely. But certainly CRO001, which I think you raised with the various members earlier this week, is very much about the immediate impact and is monitoring the immediate concerns, particularly the risks have increased because of the pandemic here, and is quite difficult to deal with, whereas the climate change, as we all know, is actually a long-term and a major risk over which we don't have huge control. So it's about the implementation of our policies. I think if I look at it more closely, is what we're dealing with, rather than the world saving the world as such. Perhaps I'm bluffing too much here.
We have some immediate responsibilities where we do control, or it's our job to control the results. That's the point, isn't it? Councillor Godfrey, I don't think they're rated as risks to the planet. These are Winchester City Council responsibilities, and there is a limit to how much we can take responsibility for all of those.
I really the process I was questioning, not the what we all do to save the world. I would welcome more consistency in the presentation of the risks, although I do understand just having each risk on this corporate risk register helps to keep it up to the forefront of what's thinking.
So would you like to challenge the current controls on that risk? Because the residual risk is a result of the measures we have put in place to mitigate that risk.
I don't think this paper would be the right basis for doing any such challenge. I think it would be very interesting to consider individual risks in more detail, where the perception and the actions that we can take might be worth us understanding more in more detail. So, for instance, the CRO1, where I think there's potentially a higher level of risk. I think perhaps we should consider looking at that in more detail at a future date, to understand why the corporate risk register shows this, rather than trying to question the pithy phrases used in this report.
Mrs. Kirkland, could you advise, please, what is the proper forum for challenging those mitigation measures?
I mean, Chair, that the report is brought to Audit and Governance for them to note, and therefore, if there are any queries, clearly officers will want to help councillors with those. What I would say is that the corporate risk register owners are either one of the directors or the chief executive, and ELB do review them all together, so there should be that consistency. So what I think we could do is we can bring that next time, and perhaps there's a bit more of a commentary. I mean, there is a commentary on, forgive me, I picked it out earlier, on page 39, in terms of what risks had changed from last time. So we would highlight to all of the committee what those changes were, so you were aware. And certainly I can talk through any of mine, Councillor Godfrey, but I'm afraid I can't talk to that specific climate one because it's not mine. So I think if I can take that away and perhaps look at there being further commentary, and that can be part of that description where we've made any amendments since the last time. Chair, is that helpful?
I think so. Let's try that approach and see how we go. Thank you very much. Any more questions on the risk register? Councillor Lamy.
Yeah, when we're looking at risk, there's surely a very high risk at the moment with the pandemic going on, where we could lose a whole department. And therefore, have we got any mitigation in place to cover those expenses? We have to look after the staff.
Yeah, of course, Councillor Lane. So we don't have a specific risk in our risk register to cover a pandemic, because actually, if you look at the nature of some of the effects of some of those, so capacity to deliver services, failure to have plans and processes in place, that can all relate to a pandemic. So that was a decision that was made, but you do see that the word pandemic is mentioned throughout the corporate risk register. Certainly it's not the risk register, but it will be our business continuity plans that identify our critical services, and therefore we would be able to identify staff from non-critical services who could move over. So a good example of that was, for example, a significant increase in demand within the customer services centre, and therefore staff that had either previously worked in that area who were still working for Winchester City Council were asked to assist for that short period. If you think of our revenue and benefits team and the increase work on them during the pandemic in terms of getting payments out of the door, we had some staff that worked in different areas of the council, and they were released to go back to revenue and benefits to help with those particular peaks. So we know where we can move our staff around. Clearly, we have to be very careful with this recent variant, and we continue to monitor that on a regular basis. I think what I can assure this committee is that we have run a COVID secure office since the start of the pandemic. We haven't managed an outbreak within the office, and we continue to have social distancing, enhanced cleaning, mask wearing in the building. And after the Prime Minister's announcement last week, there are more people working from home than before.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kirkland. Councillor Gell.
Thank you, Chair. But that raises more questions in my mind than the answer answers, because if you're saying you're not, surely not saying we're not considering them, but you are, that's what you actually said. And I'm looking at a what if scenario. We have the Omicron variant now, which is faster infecting and more contagious. Surely we must be looking at what if the department completely goes down, because this is a what is it? Well, they reckon one person in the staff party of 50 will contaminate a lot. That's we should be looking at that. A COVID secure office is only as secure as the variants that we have seen now. It's not that secure for the next variant, which may be even more potent. And I would have thought the what if scenario should be large and should be raised for the risk register. It may only be a theoretical talking head situation, but it should be there.
Yes, yeah, of course, thank you, Chair. Councillor Gavin, I'm really sorry if I wasn't clear on that. What we're saying is that the risk of a pandemic in the organisation flows through each of these risks. So we don't have one risk that says risk of pandemic, because the effects of a pandemic can affect all of our existing risks, particularly around capacity. So if I refer to CR 001 on page 58, the third point under what might go wrong is an outbreak of a pandemic that increases the pressure to continue to provide critical services. And then some of our current controls are around flexible working arrangements, service planning, our business continuity, flexible resourcing, reallocation of human and financial resources. And it says there at the bottom about the Gold Command review of resources on a regular basis. Gold Command was reconvened after last week's announcements, Councillor Gemmell. So we are looking at all of that, and we are very aware. So I'm sorry if that wasn't completely clear.
No.
Councillor Cutler, did you wish to add?
If I may, Chair, I suppose that particular point that Councillor Gemmell made about a whole team going down, I think, if I understand it right, Mrs. Kirkman probably correct me if I've got it wrong, but part of the agile working and part of the some at home and some in the office is that a whole team is not all together at one time, so that cannot happen. But I'm assuming, I think you have made that point to me before now, and you know, just for clarity, I think that one particular point that Councillor Gemmell raised is a salient point, and I think reassurance would be.
Yeah, no, Councillor Cutler, you're absolutely spot on. And if I just give an example of ELB were meeting in person in one room before the announcements last week, and now all four of us will not be in the same room at the same time because we absolutely want one of us. So we can only put mitigations in place, but absolutely we have done that. And in terms of if there was a statutory team that went down, we would also have mutual aid. There's mutual aid between local authorities. If it was a service whereby we didn't have staff, that we could just move over and assist in that way.
Thank you very much. I am reassured. Councillor Crast.
Would it be appropriate to, based on what's just been said, in terms of CR 001, to move the likelihood into the red zone, and then put the current controls one yellow box up, because it is likely.
Councillor Crast, this is what's difficult. This is the Q2 monitoring. So this is the review of the risk at the end of that period, which is not now. I think if we did review that now, we would have to look at that very carefully. I'm just wondering if there were any changes to that when it was, so it was updated. CR 001, I'm looking at page 39, Councillor Crast, was updated to reflect the additional pressure that responding to the COVID is having on capacity, additional controls added, and the risk before controls. So last time it was unlikely, and now it's highly unlikely because we've put significantly more controls in place. So that's how that one had changed. But I can't promise there'll be a change again, but I think, we would absolutely look at that, and we'll need to respond to the the fast evolving picture of this legislation.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. I am reassured. I know an enormous amount of work has been put into keeping staff safe and maintaining services, and we do appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Are we happy to move on to have anything else on the corporate risk register? Councillor Crass. Yes, we are having the debate. When we've got through questions, yes. So now we're moving into debate, members. Thank you. Would you like to speak, Councillor Crass?
No, I think really just to follow on from what you were saying, Chair, in terms of a recognition of what people are working through and how best we can provide the services we need to provide and keep people safe. You're thinking about that obviously, and we're looking at what is more important. Is it frontline services, or is it compliance with the internal audit plan, and shifting the plan to account for that? I personally would support that, for one. And maybe just throw that open, Chair, if that's something that's appropriate to get your support for, perhaps.
I'd be very happy to support that. Are we as a committee? I'm happy to support that decision on internal audit. Yes, there are lots of norths. Anybody else like to speak on this? Thank you. We are asked to note the content of the report, progress against the internal audit management actions, raise any issues, which we have done, and we have reviewed the corporate risk register as per the risk management policy, and to note the activity managing corporate risks. Are those both agreed? Thank you very much. We move on to the equality review on page 69. Sure, we're going to have some questions on that. Find the right page. Public sector equality review. Questions, please. What's the better?
Sorry, I think quickly and get more interaction from Mrs. May. I'm happy to do an introduction if you want me to.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I missed you behind the screen.
I won't comment on that. That's my public sector equality duty review. Sorry, Chair, I probably shouldn't say that. This report is presented by Simon Howson and myself, partly because it started as a review and then it has evolved into, as the review took place. Started before COVID, and then as the review took place, it became quickly apparent that it was the baton was going to pass from legal to policy. So I'm going to ask Simon to interject and assist me on this. So the report's presented to Audit and Governance before going to Cabinet, so that I can have your comments, which are valued. And what we're looking at in this report scope was to look at how the council meets its statutory responsibility, which is on local authorities, particularly, and to review the public sector equality duty policy, which was last reviewed in 2011, and the practical effects of that policy, and the review which public sector bodies must consider, looking at the policies, programs and service delivery and how it affects people with protected characteristics in particular. So before you, you have an updated policy, an updated template for an EIA, for Equality Impact Assessment, an action plan, so the findings can be placed into action, and that's where Simon in particular comes in. I will say that it has a good story as far as I was concerned. I wasn't particularly sure what I was looking at, but there was good practice through, and still is, throughout the council. And I've highlighted in the report particular areas such as housing, where they meet regularly, they discuss and implement and look at protected characteristics and what they do. So that was one very, very good example of what we had come through. There are others mentioned in the report. I've got one apology, and that's where Simon can help out. Well, first of all, we've got a mistake on paragraph 3.8. One of the protected characteristics was left off, and that is age. That will be inserted. And an equality impact report, which is to go accompany this report to Cabinet, was not included. Simon, can you assist?
Mr. Howson, are you with us?
I am, Chair. Good evening. Yes, the equality impact assessment was completed for this report, but unfortunately not attached to this report. We can circulate to members in due course, and it will be presented with the report to Cabinet in January when it is presented for adoption.
So if I just put one more sentence in there, I would actually look forward to questions and clarifications and where you think we can make improvement. One of the main areas Simon and I are looking at is a corporate approach. Simon, don't disappear on me. As a corporate approach, right across the board rather than individual teams. And Simon's got that in hand and actually looking at implementing this action plan, in particular training right across the board. So we've got to remember the public sector equality duty is not just officers, it's members as well. So we're looking at training right across so that all decisions which are taken and the implementation of all policies, protected characteristics are looked at in detail at the relevant stage. I will also add that one of the matters to look at is that an equality impact assessment isn't always required for every decision. What is required is a review of the decision or policy that's been taken to see if an equality impact assessment is actually required. And Lester and I were discussing this yesterday or the day before. We were looking at Cabinet reports, and one of the recommendations we're hoping, because we're looking for recommendations from this group, is that on Cabinet papers, the heading equality impact assessment and the review is actually changed to public sector equality duty. So when Cabinet decisions are taken, they look at the public sector equality duty as a whole. One of those, of course, which has come out, is whether an equality impact assessment is required, and if it is required, then that equality impact assessment is attached to the Cabinet report and circulated appropriately with the papers. Is that hard?
Let's take the questions, Mrs. Knight, and see how we get.
I hope I can answer.
I'm sure you can. Councillor Becker, would you like to begin?
I'll take that up. Yes, I will. I'm so pleased this paper has finally come forward. I know it's been a very long time coming, and I know that there's been a lot of work that's gone into it. So thank you to the whole team. I have three main questions. I'll give them all, and then you can decide who wants to take what. The first was, will there be an overall equalities champion for the council? I think you've got reference to a member champion and an officer champion, but will there be an overall person who takes the lead on this? You've referred to the training that is going to be provided. Can you just provide a bit more of an overview as to what that training is intended to be, who will provide it, who will receive it? I noted that it also said that training would be provided to new members, and I wondered if we could extend that to all members, because I know I certainly haven't had any training from in this forum since I was elected, and I'm sure many others haven't either. And even if they had, it's always good to be up to date, because this is a risk always for public body. And in reference to the headings for Cabinet papers, can that be changed for all council papers? Because obviously all decision-making committees should be looking at this in a coherent and sensible way.
Can I take the last question first? Because I can see Lisa nodding away, which is very helpful. And it is very helpful that Lisa has agreed. So yes, no, I agree entirely that it would go right across the board. It was actually just Cabinet papers that we were reviewing at the time in our role of monitoring officer and deputy monitoring officer at that time. So it's welcomed. As I say, I really do appreciate the feedback from this group. That would be a welcome recommendation. Thank you. If I can go up to the top, and I'm going to ask Simon to assist here. Simon, the questions, I don't know if you got them, was will there be an overall equality champion, training to new members and all members?
Thank you, Chair. If I just take the officer champion question first. Paragraph 11.20 in the report talks about setting up of an officer panel with some key officers from within the council who will support officers elsewhere in the council to undertake their equality impact assessments and be that fountain of knowledge to help and support them to complete them. So the responsibility for leading on this will actually sit with myself and the policy team, but very ably supported by an officer panel that will meet regularly to discuss the completed or drafting equality impact assessments before they come forward, attached to reports as required, but also to offer guidance and support to officers when they complete their equality impact assessments and to steer them through the completion of the templates. If I take the question around the member champion, I would like, if I could, just to pass that to Councillor Cutler. We discussed this a few weeks ago, and I think ongoing discussions were taking place on that very matter.
Thank you, Mr. President.
We haven't made a decision on that. And haven't really had much time to discuss it. I think before the paper comes to Cabinet, we would have discussed it. But I got the impression from Councillor Becker that she was talking about there being one person who, and it's quite difficult to separate, you know, we need a member champion and an officer champion and them to work together really on this. I think it's quite difficult to have one person who's the overall champion. I think, but there may be a way that you can suggest.
So in this one, I don't think it's picking me up. I know in my personal, the organisation I work in, we have an overall, and other organisations I've worked with, there's been an overall equalities champion who's not necessarily the person who is responsible for the day-to-day admin side of the PSED, but is responsible for really promoting and making sure that others are aware of it throughout the whole organisation. So they really are, the champion is the title that they do champion it for the whole organisation. They are the cheerleader, if you like, for equalities.
Well, I would suggest that ultimately has to be a member then as the overall person, but I think that's a discussion we should have with Mrs. Kirkman. And again, I'd be interested in how the committee felt as whether it should be a cabinet member or could be any member. I mean, I think that's an interesting idea that, you know, often it's a cabinet member, but it may be that it could be broadened and could be a non-cabinet member who is the champion and perhaps has more time to vote for it. I don't know. So I think that's worthy of debate, and I'd be interested in the committee's views.
Should we take that now, members? Do we have views on how the member champion should work? Councillor Godfrey, you look as if you have a view.
If you ask for views, I shall often offer one on any subject. My belief is that the hard-working cabinet member may not have the most time, nor most interest in the subject. I think that this is a important topic which needs people's attention. And if we can find somebody outside cabinet who can provide both the time and the interest, I think that would be the ideal solution for the council.
Councillor Crass.
I think this is a huge project, a huge activity, and to some degree it's a bit like the climate change. It's a cultural change within people, and in the same way climate change is impacting everything we do and should be considered in everything we do. There is a cabinet member who has ultimate responsibility for environment and climate change. So it makes sense for it to have senior ownership and to be held at a cabinet level, because it is it is huge. If you look at the action plan and what's included, it impacts every element of the way the council works, because it speaks to how we interface with people, and people cover every aspect of the council's work. So at one level, I'm intimidated by this just because there's just so much here. And when I look at the action plan, there are a couple of definite dates, but the rest is ongoing and to be confirmed. So I'm excited by it, but intimidated at the same time. And I would like to see clarity of ownership for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Councillor Denton.
Slightly disagree with Councillor Quest. I see it as a very important post or person to have. I'm kind of listening to what Councillor Becker said, that we need somebody to actually champion it, to push things through, not necessarily to do the monitoring and some of the implementations, just to get a push onto things so that everybody's actually following things. And it's a different sort of role to a sort of cabinet role, I feel. So I think perhaps that's more what Councillor Godfrey was saying as well, that needs perhaps somebody outside of the cabinet to that can have a bit more time and slightly different role to push the things.
Could we ask how other authorities manage this, please?
I'm going to be extremely honest, and I don't know on the member side and on the officer side that there's an officer champion, which Simon's picked up. On the member side, from my experience, I've actually known it to be cabinet and to be not to be cabinet, and I must admit both personalities had a driving force that one was to be reckoned with. So I think my experience, I would say that it's the personality to actually drive and champion it forward, which is the important factor we're going to be looking at here, and to influence the decisions that need to be taken, because the action plan, as you say, is large, it's not small, it's not daunting, but it does need to be worked through. So it comes down to council, and I'm not being very helpful as to whether you feel that influencing decision is going to be best at Winchester from cabinet, and whether the influencing decision is able to be taken outside cabinet and therefore pushed through. So, Lisa, do you? I was in a joint authority last time, and I had both a speech authority, one was cabinet and one was. So yeah, and the outcomes. So.
Thank you, Chair. I would observe at other authorities in Hampshire there is always a cabinet member, and I think that goes to the point of ownership. In terms of Councillor Cress, what you were saying, it needs that term of senior ownership. So absolutely, but I do think there is a difference between having that senior ownership at a cabinet level and championing. I think they can be two separate things. So certainly, I wouldn't sit here as monitoring officer that I would have concerns that decisions wouldn't be made with the public sector equality duty in hand, because a champion of that wasn't a cabinet member. So I think you could have both, Chair.
Councillor Cutler.
Well, it actually strikes me that that's quite an interesting point about the difference between ownership and someone championing it. And Councillor Becker's original comment about there being one person who's overall. I think it would be useful that there is a cabinet member who has responsibility for them. You know, and it is part of their role, as there is an officer that has that as part of their role. But you also have a champion who is a non-cabinet member, who pushes both of those people, but doesn't actually have a day-to-day role in it, but you know, will want to know how things are going, I suppose. I think that's
an exert pressure from all sides, on all sides, yeah. I think.
So I'd be happy to take that to cabinet as a recommendation we put in as part of that report, particularly if this committee agrees that would be a way forward.
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to offer that we will update the cabinet report clearly with the comments from this committee, and we can absolutely include that one as being a suggestion for cabinet. So you can see no pun intended, the audit trail from your comments here that have come from this committee onwards to Cabinet for decision.
Thank you very much. So I think our recommendation is that somebody on Cabinet needs to have the responsibility, but the member champion may be somebody who holds all parties to account. Councillor Gannon.
Well, loath to say something that's we've been here before and done something before, but I'll just hold up the minicaps that Councillor Horrell used to have. I mean, that's exactly what you're looking for, isn't it? Somebody who has the in-between, not at full cabinet, reports to a cabinet member who has overall responsibility, but who drives it more than a member would do on their own. And I'm not talking about plural persons for your minicap, but I'm talking about somebody who is in between, who would report to the cabinet via her, either via her, the cabinet member who is responsible, or actually to the cabinet in itself. Just a thought.
I think we're suggesting this needs to be investigated further, and we look forward to
just a suggestion then.
A mechanism.
Yeah.
Somebody has to have cabinet responsibility for everything.
Yeah, well,
it's a joint responsibility.
In between.
Mrs. Graham, do you feel able to put that into words?
Yes, I think so. I think what you
we're asking for more attention to be spent on the member champion role and whether it should be somebody or a body outside cabinet that holds us to account.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Are we happy with that? There's more work to be done. And are we happy that we're happy, obviously, that it should be pertain to all council papers, not just cabinet papers? Yes.
There's also a question about training.
Yes, I wanted to talk with Mr. Howson about the implementation plan because it seems to me that there's an enormous amount of work there. Would you like to expand on that?
Thank you, Chair. That is very much a summary in paragraph 11.28, and myself and colleagues in my team have already started to flesh this out into a proper project plan to enable us to roll out and embed this policy within the timescales that we've set out. We recognise that training is absolutely paramount for us to have the right knowledge and skills and tools to ourselves to be able to embed this across the organisation. So we've already reached out to a number of external organisations who would be capable of undertaking this training. We're still working out the best way in the route to carry out that training, whether we ask the organisation to come in and provide a number of sessions that ensures as many officers that run managers that run services have this training, and then separate sessions for the remainder of staff that understand the responsibilities of the policies. So we're still piecing that together. It's still very early days, but we have very much started that process of building that small table there into a much bigger action plan with responsibilities, milestones, key dates, as you would expect from a project plan. And we've already started to source an appropriate organisation to be able to undertake that training with us so that we can actually start this in the new year so that we can meet those deadlines that we've set in that table in paragraph 11.28.
Thank you, Mr. Howson. It also occurs to me that just as with standards training for members, we have referred to the need for standards light for existing members and new standards for new members. Is there a need to follow the same pattern for equalities and diversity training, that we should have an annual update for members as well as new training for new members on the subject. Mrs. Knight, I think you're...
Lisa, do you want me to put this up? Yeah. I can, there's definitely a need for member training for the board, and that has come out in the audit. Whether that needs to be an annual update, I would not know, but I would have thought there would be definitely need to be a refresher, and there definitely needs to be a new member training. My thoughts around the public sector equality duty isn't changing that fast. The law, it's not an area that the law is changing that quickly on. So it would be one of those areas where there's member training initially and then a refresher on the main points and any changes that may actually have occurred. I put to Lisa because she takes responsibility for the training. I don't want to actually.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure with public sector equality duty that you would need to do a live session. I think because you would want to remind everybody, staff or councillors, of their duties, in which case you would cover those basics at even a refresher session. So I would say it's probably public sector equality duty training every 2 years. We review our policy every 4 years, but I would say it's a full session of training, regardless of whether you're new or an existing councillor. Happy to take others' input on that one, but that would be my gut feel on that one.
Thoughts, friends? Councillor Krask.
I think I'd certainly welcome training personnel regularly and full. Although the law might not change, I think the interpretation perhaps evolves and is evolving rapidly. And if not legal interpretation, social interpretation. So that's my thought.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chair, I do have a thought on that, like almost a light bulb moment. I think, Councillor Krask, if you expanded the training to be equality and diversity, that's where I think there is that movement in terms of changing language, acceptable behaviours. So I think that's what you're getting at. And therefore, if it was equality and diversity, yes, I think that remit is one where 2 years isn't quick enough. So it would be annual. And we do have the benefit of online training and use of those resources. I would be nervous to suggest that with new councillors, because it's that, I think you need them in the room for that. So I would say annual, but equality and diversity in a few ways.
And Councillor.
So I do give equalities training in my day job. So we probably do it. We do it every year, but we probably do have staff doing it at least once every 2 years, 2 or 3 years. And that seems to be enough, but that is training mainly to lawyers and policy officials in a central government capacity who are dealing with this on a daily basis as well. We don't tie it in with diversity. It is just a pure legal training session, but I think diversity training is always a good idea as well. So it seems to fit neatly together. The training doesn't need to be long. I think our training sessions are about an hour and a half, but I do think they need to be in person because from my experience that they do elicit a lot of questions, and about half the session tends to be question based. It's an area where people like to ask lots of questions. It's not something that you can rely on common sense. There is detail to it that you need to check and want to discuss.
I always feel I learn a lot from other people's questions when it's in-person training.
I absolutely agree. Outside of the pandemic, I think, because if you look at what Mr. Housen was referring to at 11.28, some of those things we want to happen quite quickly. So it's just to say, with what we're dealing with, this first one, if it's in March, might be online. No, that's sorry. Just to clarify, what I meant was that when I meant in person, it was
not just one of those
Oh,
computer-based
yes.
click-through training. Not one of those. I was meaning some sort of meeting where people you can at least see their
Yeah,
face and ask questions. Not, I don't think everyone needs to be sitting around in the same room. I think we can do it virtually, but just not one of those click-through
I think
training
the first
sessions.
one, I think we'd definitely be looking at virtual the way things are going. So.
Thank you very much.
And that's an equalities issue in itself. Looking at disability and health.
Councillor Crass.
Thanks. I think I'd welcome it extended to diversity if that gets the job done. For me, I'm just aware of how much more I could learn about equality. I think I get confused
Yes, I started
equality
that
and equity, and there's a difference, and that does need more development around how we can deliver equality of opportunity for all. Thank you.
Might be slightly beyond our responsibilities for all, but we do it properly.
Well, we do say in the policy that the council is committed to equality of opportunity for all people.
I think we've moved into debate with seamlessly. I'm worried about the implementation of this, Mr. Howson. Subject to it being agreed at Cabinet in January, where will the implementation be monitored and by whom?
Chair, we will set out a detailed action plan which we will monitor against those key milestones and present that to ELB on a regular basis to ensure that we are sticking to those deadlines and we're maintaining that progress. And if there is any deviance from those milestones, looking at corrective action to ensure that we can still roll this out. I have confidence in the members in my team who have done a lot of very similar exercises recently around the council, around business continuity, around complaints, where we've embedded new policies or guidance into the organisation. They're very well versed at organising these sessions and actually rolling these out. So I'm confident that we can roll this out in a short space of time and have this in place for April as outlined in the table.
Thank you very much. Members, debate. Councillor Crask.
Thanks. I think I'm too concerned about implementation and about how we deliver. Interested to, I mean, we can't be the only authority going through this. Other councils are working through this as well. So is there the opportunity to learn, to share, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel all ourselves? I am interested in Appendix 4 and just how undiverse Winchester is. And the non-Christian religions have small followings, and with almost 92% identifying as white British. I'm wondering how we can represent the smaller community groups. And obviously when we're talking equality, we're not just talking about religion and ethnicity, we're talking about other characteristics as well. So just wondering how we bring that awareness and that knowledge of what is required for those groups and those characteristics, how that knowledge gets brought in, and do we have the expertise within the council? Do we have to hire it in every time? I think that's the point of how do we build that awareness into our officer and member body, and I think it is a big challenge, and I don't hear that the scale of the challenge is recognised.
Mrs. Knight, do you wish to?
I can help. Some of your concerns are picked up through the action plan.
So one of them is increased visibility through messages and celebrations, which of course are different, and communications about key national days to the community and staff. And it's a community, it's not the staff community, it's a general community. Undertaking cross-reference groups, ensuring we maximise benefits and opportunities. So part of what Simon's doing is actually looking at the communications and how we actually extend those out to these minority groups and that in general, and how we interact with them. And I think a lot of that is actually being picked up and will be picked up through the action plan which Simon's in. I can also help you with another point that you raised, Councillor, and that is that at the very beginning of undertaking the review, the COVID pandemic started. So being at home, we were in lockdown, I was able to actually reach out to other councils and see how they undertook their action plans and their policies and their structure, and we are on a very similar track.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Thank you. Any more debate? Thank you. I think we want to thank officers for the enormous amount of work that has gone into this review. It looks to be a very robust policy, and with those exceptions, we are happy to support it. Thank you. Are we happy to move on? Councillors, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 9, the invitation to become an Oxford authority. Mrs. Keys, I think you're taking it.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. So the moment is finally here. I've drafted several reports, given a verbal update to the committee. So I'm hoping that you understand the background of where we've been in order to get here today. So committee is asked to make a recommendation today to full council. You have to make the decision about whether to opt in to the national PSAA scheme for the appointment of external auditors. So I would just really quickly, as an update, committee last time requested some information about experiences elsewhere. So Hampshire and Isle of Wight CFOs did get together and discuss the possibility of a more local arrangement. So Hampshire authorities getting together to do an alternative group procurement exercise. But based on the experience of our neighbours at East Hampshire District Council, who did do their own exercise last time, it was felt that actually it took a lot of resource and no council had the resources available to lead that on behalf of the others. So although East Hampshire did say they had felt they'd had a good value for money experience with their auditors and they were pleased with their arrangement, and I believe will go it alone again, there was no uptake from other Hampshire authorities to do a local exercise.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Any questions, Mrs. Keys? Councillor Godfrey.
I thought for a moment now, my point was going to be followed until Mrs. Keys said that East Hampshire was sort of going with and by themselves. What's the justification that East Hampshire gave for continuing with this individual efforts? Because the reason I asked for this update on others' experience is because sharing the independent selection panel, if you set up for one authority, would be not a huge task to use that same group for selection for more than one. And the price that East Hampshire did get the last contract is very similar to a price we are likely to have to pay for a PSAA contract for EY.
Mrs. Keys, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can't speak on behalf of East Hampshire District Council, and they didn't go into detail about it, but they share a Chief Finance Officer with Havant Borough Council, and Havant Borough Council are not going to be going in with East Hampshire's independent auditor panel. They are going, I think their intention, or certainly the recommendation of their CFO, is putting forward is to join the PSAA scheme again. So even where you've got two authorities working closely together and sharing a chief finance officer, they seem to have quite different views, but obviously I can't speak on behalf of East Hampshire what happened.
Perhaps Councillor Godfrey, you should interrogate an East Hants councillor on this matter. Question.
Have you ever tried that?
Any other questions, members? Any other questions and any debate? This seems to be a very easy decision to make. Are we happy to accept the recommendation that we go to full council and recommend that we opt in to the PSA? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business for tonight. I'm closing the meeting at 19:56, and thank you all for your support this year. I wish you a happy Christmas and a happy New Year.
Thank you.
Officers and members, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.